You're still listening to Damascus Radio. Now stay tuned for the news.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Damascus Radio, and it's time for news for tonight, originated by Khalid Saqbani and Basim Bagdash. Prime Minister Wa'il Halaqi has stressed that the government will spare no effort to secure the basic needs for the city of Aleppo and overcome the obstacles facing it, in terms of particularly ensuring access to the city, which is what the armed forces are working on. Speaking to the Syrian TV by phone in the framework of a program on Aleppo, Al-Halaqi said, although the services available in Aleppo are acceptable, they are not up to the aspired for level. Asked about the electricity situation in the city, the Premier said the problem is that the thermal power station, which provides 800 megawatts, is the main source supplier of Aleppo, and it is broken down after it came under attacks by the armed terrorist groups. He continued saying that maintenance and repair workshops have been unfortunately unable to access the station, adding that the power supply from the Euphrates Dam is also suspended due to broken generating turbines damaged by terrorist groups' acts. Al-Halaqi assured that the situation of the health sector in Aleppo is relatively stable despite the difficult conditions, noting that 3 shipments of medical equipment and medicinal supplies have reached Aleppo. Pope Francis has called for peace in Syria and finding a political solution for the crisis in it. In a message for the world during heading the Easter Mass, the Pope said, "We ask God to turn death into life, hate into love, revenge into forgiveness, and war into peace." He also added, "Jesus Christ is our peace, and by his mercy we seek peace for all the world." Pope Francis spoke about Syria and said, "We appeal for peace in the Middle East, above all for dear Syria, for its people, torn by conflict, for the many refugees who need help and comfort. How much blood has been shed and how much sufferings must there be before a political solution is found?" Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister for Arab and African Affairs, Hossein Amir Abdullahian, has presented a new Iranian initiative to solve the crisis in Syria based on the Geneva Statement. This came during a meeting between Abdullahian and the UN envoy to Syria, Nakhdal al-Ibrahimi, in Cairo. Details are in this following report.
A new initiative called Geneva II has been proposed by Iran for solving the crisis in Syria on the basis of Geneva Agreement. The initiative was proposed by the Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister for Arab and African Affairs, Hossein Amir Abdullahian, in Cairo during his meeting with the UN envoy Nakhdal al-Ibrahimi, the Arab League Secretary General Nabil al-Arabi, and the Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi and his Foreign Minister Kamel Amarov. The Iranian initiative Geneva II includes the necessity of starting negotiations on the basis of Geneva Agreement and call for all sides concerned in the crisis in Syria to sit together at the table of negotiations. In addition to representatives on behalf of the Syrian government and the opposition, the initiative also includes the presence of representatives of Western states, particularly the United States, Russia, Turkey, Egypt, and Iran. In a press conference, the Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister for Arab and African Affairs, Abdullahian, criticized giving Syria's seat at the Arab League to the opposition, asserting that the only solution for the crisis in Syria is the political solution. Abdullahian also renewed his country's rejection of any foreign intervention in Syria and that the Syrian people should determine their future on their own, as all sides should work on ending violence. Following a meeting with the Egyptian Foreign Minister, Abdullahian said that Iran and Egypt have joint stances and everyone believes that the only solution in Syria is limited to the political solution only.
In Aleppo's countryside, a unit of the Syrian army forces carried out qualitative operations in the vicinity of the Murjan airport, killing a large number of terrorists and destroying a cannon and a heavy machine gun, in addition to a tractor and a booby-trapped car. In Deir ez-Zor, our armed forces also killed and wounded members of 2 terrorist gangs in the quarters of Al-Sana and Al-Jbili. The dead terrorists included Muhammad Aqla Abdullah. In Tel Kalach, in Hamas's countryside, the terrorists of the so-called Nusra Front committed a new savage massacre in the British Quarter, killing 10 citizens, mostly women and children. May God have mercy on the souls of all of these martyrs. Our armed forces also captured the stores of the smuggled weapons that belonged to the terrorists, one of them in the outskirts of Daraya, which is in Damascus's countryside, and the other in the village of Qsirin in the eastern countryside of Hama. The store in Daraya has proved that the terrorists of the so-called Nusra Front have received these weapons and the information from the people related to a hideout of the terrorist gangs in the outskirts of the area. This comes after the accurate information and the monitoring of a unit of the security forces, and then they stormed into the hideout and captured large amounts of weapons and different kinds of ammunition and handmade IEDs or improvised explosive devices. They also found the automatic rifles in the village of Al-Qsirin, which is east of Hama. The Syrian Arab Army, in cooperation with the people, confronted a terrorist gang, killing and wounding all of its members. The army also captured stolen vehicles carrying false tags and large amounts of ammunition and equipment, including rocket-propelled grenades and communication equipment, in addition to advanced computers. All of these were confiscated. In related news, the units of the armed forces carried out a number of qualitative operations against hideouts of gangsters in the area between the quarters of Bustan al-Basha and al-Sheikh Maqsood in Aleppo. They also destroyed 2 rocket launchers, 2 mortar guns, and 3 vehicles carrying heavy machine guns. The operations led to the death and the wounding of many terrorists who committed crimes of looting, including 1 sniper. A unit of the armed forces also clashed with armed terrorist groups in Sheikh Maqsood, killing and wounding many terrorists, including 6 non-Syrians. Back to you, Basim.
Thank you, Khalid. Iranian Foreign Minister Ali Akbar Salehi has reiterated condemnation of launching a missile that contains chemical materials by the armed terrorist groups in Khan al-Asal in Aleppo on the 19th of last March, which claimed the lives of dozens of innocent people. In a letter directed to his Kazakh counterpart, Erlan Idrisov, delivered by the Iranian ambassador in Astana, Salehi called for condemning this heinous crime and exerting efforts to prevent its reoccurrence, in addition to opening neutral investigations regarding supplying terrorists with money and weapons. The Iranian foreign minister stressed the necessity of applying all the items of the Chemical Weapons Convention, or the CWC, in an effective way by the signing countries. Mr. Dahi Khalfan, commander of the Dubai police, asserted that the Muslim Brothers concluded an agreement with the U.S. aimed at achieving security for Israel. He asserted that as long as the guide of the Muslim Brothers continued to rule Egypt, Hamas would not be allowed to fire any rockets against the Israeli entity. Khalfan told the Kuwaiti paper Al-Anbar that the Arab countries were witnessing fragmentation and not spring. He said, the Muslim Brothers in Egypt were the result of an American plot aimed at protecting Israel. He also asserted that Kuwait's inclination to follow the Muslim Brothers' agenda would lead to massacres in the Gulf. Back to you, Khalid.
Thank you, Basim. 8 Iraqis have been killed and 15 others have been injured in a terrorist blast that targeted a police station in the middle of the Tikrit city north of Iraq today. A source in the Iraqi police said that the suicide bomber blew up a truck full of explosives near the police station and an oil and an oil plant. This resulted in the killing of 8 Iraqis and destroying parts of both of the buildings. The source also expected that the death toll will go up as the rescue teams and the security forces have removed the debris, searching for more victims. It is to be noted that Baghdad and Tikrit have earlier Friday witnessed a series of terrorist blasts targeting several mosques during the Friday prayers, which resulted in the killing and the injury of dozens of Iraqis. The armed men in Libya, which is witnessing a state of lawlessness and the arms chaos, have kidnapped Muhammad Ali al-Shantal, the consultor of the office manager of the Libyan Prime Minister Ali Zaidan at a time when the Libyan health centers are suffering from the repercussions of the armed men's assaults on the medical crew. On the other hand, the Libyan Health Minister Nuruddin Darman has asserted that the Libyan hospitals are witnessing a situation that is very bad due to the continuing flagrant assaults on the medical crews, which have negatively affected the health services. It is to be noted that the armed men have earlier yesterday taken over the Justice Ministry's building, and they are taking control of all of its facilities. Now over to our final item with my partner Basim.
Thank you very much, Khalid. As tension and beating the drums of war in the Korean Peninsula continued, the U.S. has sent 2 Phantom F-22 warplanes to South Korea to take part in the joint military drills between Washington and Seoul at a time when the South Korean President, John Hai, threatened with a fast and powerful military response to any move from Pyongyang, regardless of the political consequences. These developments have come on the backdrop of the escalating tension between both Koreas, and as Washington supports its ally Seoul against the so-called Democratic Korea provocations as described in a statement by the U.S. command in South Korea. The South Korean Defense Ministry, on its part, announced that it is preparing a plan, calling it active deterrence, which allows the South Korean forces to direct preventive strikes or preemptive strikes to its neighbor. It is to be noted that Pyongyang had earlier last week responded to Washington's announcement of training flights of B-52 strategic bombers and B-2 Phantom warplanes in the South Korean airspace by announcing that it is ready to go into war with its southern neighbor, threatening of bombing Guam and Hawaii, the American islands in the Pacific, placing its forces in a state of full alert and declaring a state of war with Seoul.
With this, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of our news bulletin for tonight. Thank you for joining us.
Damascus Radio presents News and Views.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, to all of you. Russian Kommersant newspaper wrote about with supplying weapons to the Syrian opposition. On this, the paper said, France and Britain could not convince their partners during a Brussels summit the need to lift the sanction of supplying the Syrian opposition with weapons, where this idea did not receive support of everyone and which was rejected by Germany and a number of other countries. Germany contradicted the supplying of weapons to the Syrian opposition and shared it in that Netherlands and other countries. The newspaper reported that the reasons for opposition refusal to provide weapons to the Syrian opposition are there. First, if the opposition received the Western arms, they will refuse to sit down at the table of dialogue and peaceful settlement, which means that the issue would be only resolved on the battlefield and would be leading to the rise number of victims. Secondly, there is nothing which guarantee these weapons to fall into the hands of radical Islamic groups and which will not be used in other hot areas. Thirdly, supplying of arms to the opposition would make the region to witness a new race of arms and would almost never settle the dispute. according to the paper that although both France and Britain recognize these facts, but it is clear that the imposed sanction will end in May and will not be extended, since now London and Paris are announced that they will be out from the ban system if the Union do not lift it early.
That was news and views from Damascus Radio. Damascus Radio presents Syrian Local Press Review.
Hello dear listeners, to all of you. Today's newspapers issued in Damascus give prominence to the following headings. Christian denominations in Syria, who follow the Western calendar, celebrated Easter, the resurrection of Jesus the Christ. The celebrations were limited to performing prayers. Pope Francis called for peace in Syria and for finding a political solution for the crisis in it. Units of armed forces targeted a gathering for terrorists in Kissin village in Al-Hula and destroyed a number of terrorists' cars in the village of Talado in the countryside of Homs. Terrorists committed a new massacre storming into Al-Buruj neighborhood in the city of Tal Kalakh in Homs countryside, killing 10 citizens in addition to looting a number of houses and shops. 1 citizen martyred in an explosive device blast in Damascus. Army unit rebels infiltration attempt from Lebanon. Armed terrorist groups set ablaze 3 oil wells in the province of Deir ez-Zor. President Germany's Federal Intelligence Service, Gerhard Schindler, affirmed that the influence of terrorists affiliated with Al-Qaeda is increasing among the opposition in Syria. Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister for Arab and African Affairs, Hossein Amir Abdullahian, affirmed that the only solution to the crisis in Syria is the political solution, reiterating his country's support for all initiatives that are in this outline. Abdullahian, following his meeting with the Egyptian Foreign Minister in Cairo, said that Iran and Egypt have a mutual position and they both believe that the political solution is the only solution for the crisis in Syria. Abdullahian discussed with UN envoy to Syria, Al-Akhdar al-Ibrahimi, the situation in Syria. Algerian humanitarian aid supplies arrived in Jadit Yabous Center on the Syrian-Lebanese border in Damascus countryside. Israeli occupation authorities sentenced liberated captive Sidqi al-Maqr to 3 months of house arrest after they arrested him at Majd al-Shams football field and releasing him later after interrogating him. Al-Thawra newspaper, in its editorial, writes about the anniversary of the Land Day as saying, dozens of Palestinians participating in a march marking the occasion of Land Day expelled the Qatari Al Jazeera channel's staff from Saknin city in the occupied Palestinian territories of 1948 in protest of its hostile and provocative coverage of the Syrian crisis. Addressing Al Jazeera staff, they chanted, "Out, out, the Syrian land is free," the thing which forced them to leave the march at once. With hoisting the Syrian and Palestinian flags, the participants expressed their full support to Syria, stressing that the Palestinian-Syrian cohesion and rejection of Israeli international imperialistic conspiracy against Syria should be the title of Land Day.
is a review of the Syrian local press issued in Damascus this morning.